Okay, in Lesson 8, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. It's going to be review and putting things together that we've done before, but I'm also going to add in navigation lists with CSS. Before you do this lesson, you must do these tutorials over at Max Design. Okay, if you haven't done them, stop the video now, go back and do them, and then open them up in Notepad++. Okay, so over in Notepad++, we should have our three different navigation lists that we've already created from those tutorials. All right. In the browser, they're going to look like this. Here's the basic list. Here's the rollover list, vertical rollover list, and here's the horizontal rollover list. I want to explain these just a little bit, okay? So, this one is all review. We did this type of stuff back in Lesson 4 when we talked about lists and tables. So we've got a basic UL. Inside the UL, we have a link, href, and then a link to Google. And then we've got some content. Here, milk, eggs, cheese, vegetables, fruit. Now the CSS is all review. List style type, we talked about back in Lesson 4. We changed it to none so that we would take away the bullets. We could, for a UL, we could put square or circle or disk in there, but we want none. Padding 0, margin 0 on the UL so that the LIs stretch all the way to the edge of it. And then LI, padding left, 6M. 6M, an M is a unit of measurement that's relative. And what that means is 1M is equivalent to 1 letter height. So if we compare it to the letter D, 1M would be the height of the letter D. 0.6M would be 0.6, the height of the letter D, or 2/3 as high as the letter D. If the letter D were to get bigger than this, if it were to become 24 pixels, for example, 1M would be 24 pixels, and 0.6M would be 2/3 of 24. Okay? Which I think is 16. So, this is a very basic list, and it displays like this. Okay? Let's move on to the rollover list. This one's a little bit more complex. And this one I really want to talk a little bit more about descendant, okay? The idea of descent. There are all of these use descendant selectors. In Lesson 7, we introduced the descendant selector, but we didn't talk a lot about it. All I said was that a descendant selector looks like this. We've got one selector here and then another selector here with a space separating them, okay? And what this says is that all ULs that exist within nav container ID will have this style rule applied to them. Okay? So let's talk a little bit more about this ancestry idea. Okay? So here's the structure of our HTML markup. And you notice that I always tab over whenever I do any nesting. This helps me to visually understand the levels of ancestry. Okay? So let's just pretend that we are milk, okay? You're milk. You're the kid. And you have a parent, right? Maybe you don't have a dad, but you have a mom. This one is your mom, okay? So this is you, this is your mom. Your mom has 4 brothers and sisters. Your Aunt Patty, your Aunt Selma, Uncle Homer, and Uncle Joe. And you have a bunch of cousins, okay? All of these children of your aunts and uncles are your cousins. When we think of it this way, your mom has these siblings, okay? So this is the first stage of ancestry, child and parent, cousins and siblings, okay? The next step out would be grandparent. This would be your grandparent. It would also be your cousin's grandparent. And it would be your mom, it would be her parent. It would be your aunts and uncles' parent. Further out, we have a great-grandparent. This is your great-grandparent. It's your grandparent's parent, your parent's grandparent, and your cousin's great-grandparent. So this is ancestry, okay? And this is how we talk about it when we deal with web design. And these relationships become very important. The reason is we do a lot of descendant selection when we're doing CSS. This one, every single rule uses descendant selection. I don't see a single rule that just does UL or UL something like that. I don't see a single rule that just does nav container. None of them. We do descendant selection in all of these. The reason we do that is so that we can have links on the page elsewhere that aren't going to be styled with this margin, so that we can have, or list items that aren't going to have this margin, so that we can have links that aren't going to have this style, and links that aren't going to use the hover quality, and so that we can have ULs that aren't going to have this margin padding and list style type. So that we can have different uses of these elements elsewhere in the page. The only area that ULs are going to be styled like this is going to be inside of the nav container. So descendant selection is really powerful, and it's great for directly selecting specific elements within other elements. Okay? So, other new things that we did here. We did something called display block. Display block ensures that this LI, or this A, becomes block level. That means it's going to have its own line, and it's going to make sure that nothing else can sit on a line next to it. So this list couldn't sit up there, this link couldn't sit up there, this link couldn't sit up there. They're all on their own line. They all force a return, a hard return after them, or a space above and below. So it's block level. The display property is new. We also use the display property in horizontal list menu, and I'll get to that in just a minute. And then the other thing that was new was a:hover. This is called a pseudo class. We're not going to get a lot into pseudo classes in this course at NHCC, but this is the only time we're going to use a pseudo class. A pseudo class allows us to select a certain property within an element. In this case, we're selecting something called the hover quality of A. Hover allows us to hover our cursor or sit our cursor above the element. And when we hover, something happens. It creates interactivity. Okay? In this case, when we hover, it changes the color of the background. All right? So that's a pseudo class. Now, let's move on to the horizontal menu, the horizontal navigation really quickly. The only thing that was new in this was display inline. This is going to force our list items to be inline level. If block level makes sure that every element has its own line and nothing sits next to it, inline allows for other items to sit on the same line next to it. So it allows for these LIs to sit on the same line next to one another. Normally, LIs are block level. They force down to another row every time you put another LI, and it forces the next one down to another row. When we force it to inline level, it allows us to have them sitting on the same line together. Okay, so that's a brief explanation on these three different types of lists and some of the new things that you've seen. What we're going to do in the next video is take these lists and put them into a 3-column layout. Okay?